Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Rader. I'm the programming manager of UMS, and I am joined with Rachel Mars. Rachel, where are you tuning in from right now?
Confusingly, I'm in Eugene, Oregon, where I am for a year because my partner got a gig here. So I would normally be coming to you from Holloway, North London, but actually I'm in Oregon.
Eugene is very, very similar to Ann Arbor. The kind of small, intellectually robust college town with a big football team.
Yes.
So I think you'll feel right at home coming from Eugene to Ann Arbor.
Good.
Can you, to kick things off, would you tell us a bit about who you are and your path to becoming an artist and a creator? And I think whatever parts of your identity would be important for us to know.
Sure.
Tell us it all.
So God, where does it start? I think it starts really quite young. It starts with a sort of family storytelling who sat around. We often sat around dining tables and told gags and told stories. So there was always a kind of look, and it was an attention seeking family, I would say. And so I got very into I got really into gags and jokes from when I was about 5. And so would be in the playground kind of telling jokes to people. And I got used to this idea of having an audience and listening to see what jokes worked and what didn't. And then I studied English and theatre at university, which was not a training. That was very much, they didn't want you to go and be an actor or a performer, really. That was a kind of intellectual, theoretical training. But that course has produced a lot of theatre makers because I think it had this kind of analytical grounding. So it's produced quite a lot of smart, I would say, theatre makers in the UK. And then I just started, I guess, like a DIY tradition. I knocked on some doors. I found a performance poetry organization called Apples and Snakes who kind of took me on paid me to be a kind of assistant. And then through that, I began watching this kind of performance poetry scene in the UK, which I liked. But then there were some sort of offshoot weirdos. I was like, what are they doing? Because they're using text, but they're also using props and comedy. And everyone was like, oh, they're the live artists. They're the kind of Venn of performance and live art. And sort of started making work really from that point. So from about 2007, 8, I was beginning to make my own work through that kind of DIY live art community. And then haven't really stopped, essentially. And so identity-wise is interesting, isn't it? I'm having to qualify my work with identity kind of signifiers more and more, which I don't hate, but I think it's interesting that that's happening. So things I always say about myself is Jewish, female-ish, queer. So those are the kind of things that show up in my work or are kind of filters through which I'm making work.
Okay. I would say live art is probably more known as performance art in the US. Just to clarify for our American viewers for this.
Yeah.
You are doing 2 performances in Ann Arbor, which is really exciting. The first is called Our Carnal Hearts, and we've got a trailer that we're going to watch here quickly.
Mm-hmm.
If you catch me at the border, I got visas in my name.
Congratulations to you for being here. Congratulations to you on your marvellous pigtails.
As if the light from the fire has finally illuminated the parts of themselves they would never normally admit.
We really are on the brink of something special.
Congratulations, I'm so happy for you.
Holding them up by the throat and shouting.
And so it goes on and on and on, climbing the gates and knocking on doors of people like you, but a little bit better.
What was the inspiration for this piece, and what do you want audiences to take away?
Yeah, so it had a kind of, often my work has like a personal and a political starting point that meet. So for this one, it was sort of 2011, 2012, 2013. We were in a kind of Tory government system, Conservative government system. And they were doing a lot of cutting of social care. And instead, they were saying there was this idea of the big society, that a kind of, that people would voluntarily start looking after each other because they were cutting social care. And at the same time, there were some big riots that happened after a black man was killed by police. And those riots sort of tipped into looting. And immediately there was a blame on those kind of rioters that this was about acquisition of stuff. This wasn't about a kind of actual political cause. And I began, and then I was kind of operating as you do in an artistic community where you are meant to be colleagues, but you're also competitors because of funding, because of opportunities, and yada, yada, yada. And I was just noticing that we don't, I mean, I think probably everybody, but as an artistic community, we weren't discussing how we felt when we failed to get something. And one of our dear friends, you know, got something. And so I just started getting really interested in envy, essentially, and this kind of really grubby, it's got a really bad name, envy, as an emotion. Like it's uncomfortable, it's rarely discussed. You feel envious of people that are very close to you and perhaps that you love, and you can't express it. So it kind of bubbles up into other things. So it was this kind of combination of thinking about capitalist structures and how they often reframe people's desire for justice as, and like, oh, they're envious. It's like, well, we're not envious. It's just that we don't have things. And a kind of personal question about how to deal with envy in this kind of quite disgusting competitive market that we find ourselves in as artists. So it's a kind of space to think about envy, competition, how we talk to each other about how we feel about those things. And it's naughty. It's like a slight, it doesn't come down on one side or the other. It doesn't tell you exactly how you should feel about it. In some moments, it's a celebration of envy, which makes people kind of uncomfortable. And the other thing to say about it is it's got this backbone of singing. So it's kind of in a square, like I think you just seen on the trailer. The setup is a square, and there's kind of me knocking about in the center. And then there are 4 choral singers, one on each side, who provide this kind of live choral score all the way through. And that came about because of this kind of notion of, oh, we can cut social care, but we'll all sing together. We'll join a choir. That'll solve everything. It feels so good, which it does. It feels great to sing together. But it just felt like a kind of like a little blank, like a little pull over what's actually happening, is that we'll all just sing together gorgeously, and then the social problems will go away.
So could you talk a little bit about what people will experience in the show? And I think it's a little bit about the structure, the music, the text.
Yeah.
What role does the audience play?
Yeah, so it's the kind of important thing about it is this kind of scene structure, the way that the space is set up. So it's on 4 sides on the flat, but on 4 sides, a bit like a boxing ring, with an audience wrapped all the way around. And that means that you've got kind of banks of audience looking at each other and looking at each other's reactions, which I thought was important for the subject matter. Then in the center row, the center seat of the center row of each of those 4, you've got a choral singer. So 4 singers who travel with the show, and they provide a live choral soundtrack all the way through. So if you're an audience member, you might find that you're pretty close to a singer, or you might find that you're, just behind one. And then there's me, and I'm sort of essentially weaving 3 sort of performance modes. One which is very direct to the audience. We talk about her as the high priestess, and she kind of it's almost religious in feel, and it's kind of direct to Drax. It's welcoming the audience to this sort of conjuring show about envy. Then there's a more storytelling mode, again in the audience, which is a story about it's a Hungarian folk story about a fairy who comes to visit you in the middle of the night. And it's a bit murky about what they're offering. And then the third mode is a kind of almost like an audio piece where I'm actually off stage. And that is another kind of weaved story about a woman who's experiencing massive feelings of envy and is essentially takes refuge in arson and starts burning bigger and bigger and bigger things. And so it's this kind of weaving of these three aspects. So it's text heavy, I would say, but it feels very live because it has moments of audience interaction, and because of the singing, I think makes it feel pretty live and like it's important that you're there as an audience. It can't happen without you.
So you talked in a previous conversation we had, and I may be missing some of the details, so you can help fill them in. But you previously talked about doing this project, I think it was in Boston, in the immediate aftermath of maybe Trump's election, and how the show was able to sort of contain the feelings of that moment. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that experience.
Yeah, it was a hell of a thing. So we were teching on election day, fully expecting, because we're all idiots, that we would then post-tech go to an election party and see the first female president. And then obviously it didn't happen. And so there was this kind of like physical shock that went through everyone the whole country, but everyone involved in the tech team. The singers that we had at that time were students, American students. And we had to then open it the night after. And there was this question. I remember having this question. I spoke to my director back here, like, do I need to make adaptations? Do I need to acknowledge what's happened? How can we, because people are like in shock and deep trauma at this point. And so I just made a kind of very slight adjustment to the beginning to really welcome people and to really make it clear that like this was about a group of people coming together and being together for this hour. And to thank them for coming, because I thought, God, you're still coming out to art like the night after this has happened, when everyone's terrified. And it ended up feeling like quite a cathartic experience. I also, the curtain was like, we're going to be in this bar afterwards, like stay and talk to us. And people did. So it kind of, for people that had chosen to still, honor those tickets, I think they wanted to be in company, and they wanted to be around other people and have a space to talk about how they were feeling through the kind of prism of the show, which is about capitalism and its failures, really.
Given that it's been a little while, a spell since you've last performed the show, do you expect that you'll be making any adaptations or updates?
Yeah, I think there are kind of bits in the like very live bit that always get adapted according to where we are. So it's it's location specific. And there's also a bit which is kind of tongue-in-cheek bit where I sort of hail essentially billionaires, like massive businessmen. So that always gets redone. I mean, horrifically, one of those names was, when I first did it in like 2016, one of them was Donald, because he wasn't yet who he was. Well, he was who he was, but he hadn't been president yet. But, I was thinking about it yesterday. We're back, I don't know if I go as nail on the head as the Elons or the Jeffs, but things have kind of moved a little bit. But sadly, I think what's happened in the past 4 years, especially in the UK and probably here, is that the gap, the inequality gap has just got bigger than ever. And the kind of attempt by a right-wing government to reframe that inequality as something that they have nothing to do is kind of, we're just running in two different parallel realities about how things actually are. So sadly, I think a lot is still relevant.
The second performance that you're doing is called Your Sex Are Shit, Older, Better Letters. And we're going to take a look at a trailer here.
I'm delighted to see that you do like being. If I gave you a bigger, stronger, then lie down by you and begin to lick lazily around your strap in, it's going to be a long night. I prefer your arse, darling, to your bubbies because it does such a dirty thing. I made you a mixtape. I love you. I wonder if your body wants mine the way mine wants yours. You up against the refrigerator. You have such a wonderful refrigerator. Your ring is a great comfort. I look at it and I think she does love me, or else I wouldn't be wearing it. And I remember her saying that when she did it, it felt like clawing her way up a hill and then running down it really fast.
Are you done?
How in the world did this show come about?
I have an artist, a New York-based artist called Scott Shepherd, to blame for this.
Who's been to Ann Arbor with the Railroad game?
Yeah, he's in, they called Lightning Rod Special, that company. Yes. So it was like the day, I keep going to America and terrible thing happens. So I was there when Trump got elected, and I was also there with a performance partner, Greg Wohead, on a, where were we? Like a retreat in upstate New York when Brexit happened. So like just horribly traumatized and scarred, trying to make work in Saratoga Springs, miserable and worried. And then Scott Shepherd was just like, let me read you something, I'll cheer you up. And so he read us this James Joyce sex letter, which is from 1909. And it's James Joyce writing to his, they weren't married at that point, but they became married, his sort of common law wife, Nora Barnacle. And I was shocked. Like, I'm not.
This text is how the show begins, correct?
It's the letter that begins the show. It's full on. It is full on. And it just filled me with so much like joy. It's beautifully written. And it just started me off on a kind of journey of thinking about how we communicate desire to each other in written forms and the difference between letter writing and kind of sexting. And so I worked with a couple of sexologists in the UK who like helped me source other kind of mainly literary figures, sex writings and artists. And so the backbone of the show is this kind of spine of love and sex letters from mainly dead artists, which starts quite straight and then skews kind of queerer as we go along. And then I also did a call out for people to send me their sexts, their favorite and least favorite sexts, consensually, and also source some really terrible ones off the internet. So again, like I tend to like, my shows often have 3 bits. Boring, repeating myself, but it works. So there's like this letter bit, there's sexts, which are just shown and not commented on. And then there's a bit of kind of personal, slightly smudgy autobiographical stuff about coming into queerness and the kind of, and writing as a kind of sexual practice, I guess.
And the sexts you're getting those from what, like texting, Twitter?
Yeah. Some of them were stolen from the internet. Some of them are people screenshotting them from their own Grindr, Hinge, whatever, you know, Guardian Soulmates in the old days. Just people's terrible texts. There's some really bad stuff. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite? I've tried to write this as a pun, and let's see if I can pronounce it. Do you have a favorite sect SERP from the show?
So people come away and they're talking about the Joyce.
Yeah.
They're talking about the Joyce because it's full on and it's from 1909. And so it surprises people. And they're both very into like scat and like arse stuff. So that's what people talk about. The bit I love is a part of a Georgia O'Keeffe letter, actually. So she's writing to her partner Alfred Stieglitz, and I think there's something like 25,000 pages of letters exist between them.
Wow.
And she's just like, I'm waiting on my back, waiting to be split wide apart by you, and then it goes off on this kind of, but it's so like it's really rude, but it's also incredibly poetic. So actually, of all of the letters, that's the one that I feel is like the hottest. You've got like, you know, Joyce doing all his bum stuff and Mozart talking about farting and Bukowski using like lots of language. But actually for me, it's like, it's her and the images that she conjures that are my favorite.
Will any famous Ann Arbor sexters make an appearance in the show?
Maybe. I'm going to do some research. might have been doing a little bit of research. I might have been had little things told to me in my ears that may or may not make it in the show.
All right. Well, we'll have to see.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to see what happens. This is a more general question. What is your process for making shows? Do you start with the text first?
Yeah. I think because of this sort of not training at Leeds University, which was so academic, there's a huge period of research first. So in some ways it feels like a kind of MA or PhD process, because there's this big like amassing of historical research, philosophical research, social research. And then I tend to do an absolute load of free writing to kind of try and write my way into what the story is. So it has historically been text first, and then I'll get into a room, sometimes on my own. Like Arcana Hearts, I just was in a room on my own with a microphone, which is quite weird to then stand up and try and kind of live riff on your own. But I did that a lot, and that's actually how I ended up with the High Priestess kind of character. But yeah, so text, like a mixture of written text that I'm bringing into a room and text that I'm riffing and then gets formalized afterwards. And then it's a really collaborative process. So those singers and the director, Wendy Hubbard, we were then involved in this kind of construction of Arcana Hearts in the room together. Your Sex was more, because it wasn't funded. So that was like a kind of almost made it in my bedroom sort of thing, because I just didn't have the money to bring lots of people in. So that was, I sort of made it fast and dirty first, put it on at the Yard in London, and then started, and it didn't have a proper sound escape and it didn't have a proper lighting. And then as I developed it, I brought people on to kind of, make it a more full production.
Okay, so I'm going to move to like the fun questions. What are you doing in the 15 minutes before you walk on stage?
Remembering to put on makeup. So they're two very different things, actually. So Your Sex is generally just me, or sometimes it's me and a sign language interpreter. And so that I'm listening to a song called Mountains by Sia before she was disgraced. But it's kind of big and epic and feels great. And remembering to put on makeup. And I do have like quite a, I am quite strict with a verbal warm up for that one. It's a lot of talking. Mm-hmm. And even though it's like some of it's read, like there has to be a like dexterity. So there's like some very annoying art, actor things that I do that with like, I'm doing all that nonsense, and a fair amount of kind of stretching and things like that. So it's in that way, that one's quite traditional in a way. And then I'm 10 minutes before I open, I'm hiding, because I like to listen. I always like to listen to the audience and see who's coming in, how loudly they're talking over the in-house music, what kind of vibe is it going to be. So I'm definitely like waiting and listening. Arcana Hearts, there's 5 of us, 6 with the production manager. So that is a much more, again, like it's jocular, but there is, we have a ritual. We have a little ritual where we always do it with some breathing and some verbalization and stuff, and singing. That one has a lot of singing in the 15 minutes before we're warming up. And generally I'm kind of the singers, because the singers are in place when the audience come in. So they're kind of set up, concentrating, and I'm naffing about and distracting them until they tell me to go away. That's normally what happens in that one.
You have a sort of minor, let me start this over. There's a kind of Rachel Mars social media meme that has to do with pickles. And I'm wondering if you can tell us about that. We have some famous pickles in Ann Arbor. And so I wonder if there's opportunity for Ann Arbor pickle content.
Oh, 100% there is. During lockdown, I accidentally started reviewing pickles, or as we would call them, gherkins, online. And someone suggested it as a joke. Because I found one particular gherkin. I was like, oh, I've never seen this before. And I recorded the video and someone said, do a YouTube channel. So there is one, folks. Pickle Watch reviews. So we've done about 21, 22 videos. They're one take and it's just me eating a gherkin and telling you about it. It's so straightforward. And I have what I call the checking goy, who is the non-Jew who I share an office with, and so he like comes in and gives his pitch and then goes off. But I think like it was the one thing in lockdown that really gave me joy, and I think it gave other people joy because it's stupid and simple, and it has a small but loyal following. People under 10, like between like 7-year-olds to 10-year-olds, love it. My friends' kids love it.
I think pickles are one of those universally, they're just kind of always amusing.
Yeah.
Just as a thing that exists in the world. There's a very famous Jewish deli in Ann Arbor called Zingerman's. It's like a foodie mecca. And the question you always get when you order a sandwich or whatever there is, do you want new or old pickles?
Uh-huh.
And so if you're ordering kind of en masse for people, I always just go halvesies.
Okay. Yeah.
But then I also think McClure's pickles might be based in Detroit, which is like a more, like it's got a bigger export business.
Yeah, I think I've seen them. Yeah, like this move has basically introduced me to a whole world of. I haven't got a checking goy here, but like I actually did my first review yesterday. I haven't put it up yet. That was a chip, what you would call chips, what we would call crisps.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine in Eugene the pickles are all just like CBD infused or something.
Yeah, some of them definitely are. I'm not sure I'm going to touch those.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for talking with me today, Rachel. Really looking forward to having you with us. And I always give a customary warning that January is brutal in Ann Arbor. So pack the parka.
I'm gonna be just 100% thermals, I think.